Barely a year ago in December 2022, a 23-year-old Kenyan runner by the name of Kelvin Kiptum burst onto the marathon scene by winning his debut marathon in Valencia in a mind-blowing time of 2:01:53, and that was good enough for the fourth fastest time in history. He seemingly had no weakness, no Kiptumite. No. Since that time, Kelvin Kiptum backed up his debut performance with two other runs for the ages. In April 2023, on the streets of London, he ran a blistering time of 2:01:25, which was good enough for the second fastest marathon of all time, before taking it to Chicago's streets in October 2023. By that time, the running world was switched on to this ethereal young talent. What was he going to do this time? Well, he won Chicago, but he also broke Eliud Kipchoge's world record and became the first human to go under 2:01 in an official road marathon by running 2:00:35 seconds. And now it's all eyes on Rotterdam in April 2024. Could he possibly be about to go under 2 hours? But how's he achieved this staggering set of results in just his first 3 marathons? So actually, when you do a bit of research into Kelvin Kiptum and his history, it's a little bit mysterious, from his date of birth even being controversial, to the fact that is he self-coached or does he have a coach? What was his first race and what's his training routine? What does it look like? Because it's not cut and dry, any of it. So it turns out he is actually now being coached by Gervais Hakizimana, but it wasn't always that way, and details are therefore starting to creep out about his actual training. And it won't surprise you to know that the majority of it is pretty standard Kenyan affair, and when I say standard I mean still superhuman, but he focuses a lot on easy miles, double run days, they have the staple track sessions and the fartlek sessions, and plenty of long runs with marathon paces thrown in. So there's not much difference to the general training that we hear about there, but it's in Kelvin Kiptum's volume of training, the distance that he goes through each week. That's the mind-blowing thing, because he regularly runs 250 to 280 kilometers a week, and at points he was topping out for weeks on end before London, running 300 kilometers a week. Now if you compare that to Eliud Kipchoge, his standard weekly mileage is about 180 to 220 kilometers. Oh, and he has no days off, he just rests when he gets tired. I mean, if that was me, it sounds like it would be most of the time. I mean, this is pretty crazy, I think you'd agree. But there are problems posed by this approach, and I feel like it could maybe set the wrong example to people like us, and that's what we're going to discuss now, is just how sensible this approach is, and we're going to go running. And the first problem I think that is going to inevitably arise, because it always does, is that there's always a drip down effect when top level athletes do something different, like with the Norwegian method of training. People are now much more on board with knowing what their lactate levels are and testing and running at threshold. They might see Kelvin Kiptum running 300 kilometers a week and think, okay, well, he just throws more volume at it. That's what I do. And for the everyday runner like you or I, that's almost always a recipe for disaster. And the other thing you've got to think about is the sustainability of the approach, because even Kelvin Kiptum, I'm sure he would tell you that he's not going to be running those types of distances for his life. And ultimately, why do we do this thing unless we are at his level, where it is about performance, where it is about breaking world records? Do I need to run every single day high volume, or do I want to run in a way that just kind of fits into my life? Because even Kelvin Kiptum's coach has said his approach is unsustainable. So what message again is that sending to us? But on the flip side of this is, what it does show is that at this kind of volume, it is possible. Just, I would say, caveat it with under a very specific set of circumstances and environments. So it sounds like there's a trade-off happening here. This volume, even in Kiptum's coach's opinion, is unsustainable. But what if it's the volume that gets him to the first ever official sub-2 hour marathon in a race? Would it even matter if he faded back away as quickly as he arrived? And that's the big question in my mind. What's important here, to us and to Kiptum? Because we might be watching this thinking that Kiptum's approach has short-lived all over it. No way can he stay at the top level running these volumes with no days off. But would Kiptum see it like that? If you'd have told him at the start of his running journey that he could be the first man to break 2 hours, but he'd only get a running career at the top level for a handful of years, would he take it? Would you? Because when it's all said and done, very few runners ever are going to achieve what Kipchoge or Bekele or Gabriel Selassie did. Such longevity. So is the volume worth the gamble for a shot at immortality? But perhaps it's about how the shot's being taken. So what's the message that's being sent here? Because remember, these are just thoughts, by the way. I'm sharing kind of part of opinions, but I haven't formed them strongly yet. But Mary and I are teachers. We are inherently trying to be at least role models for people that we teach, and the same on YouTube. We're trying to be role models. And I think I look at Kelvin Kiptum and I think about the message he sends when he's interviewed and they ask, at what point did you feel pain when you were running the marathon? And he said, I didn't feel pain.
Have you ever felt at any part of the marathons you've run that you were in pain at all?
And I think, what's that message? And then on the flip side of that, you got Eliud Kipchoge, who when asked what he does when he feels pain, and he tells this incredible story about when the hardest parts of the marathon hit, he smiles because it tricks his brain into enjoying it and forgetting about the pain. And I think that's just more realistic way of approaching this, because what we as mere mortals want to know when you're running a marathon is that it hurts even when you're at the top end. It's got to hurt, right? So I'm not saying Kelvin Kiptum's a bad role model, absolutely. In fact, I don't know enough about him to just say that. But what I'm saying is that perhaps there are other role models out there, like Eliud Kipchoge, that show that level of humility, accept that they're in pain, that also don't have a coach that says that they think that they're training too hard in an unsustainable way. Again, even actions are role modeling, and again, as mere mortals, we might look at that and go, right, let's throw volume at the problem. But as I say, these are just thoughts in my head. They're not opinions one way or the other. I'm just trying to work it out. So where is the future bar being set? Because ultimately training, just like hairstyles or fashion, nutrition, is kind of cyclical. We go from volume to quality, back to volume, but maybe via a different training method, and it all goes round and round again. But it does seem like a new level has been unlocked, only available to a rare few whose bodies can do it. But what about the athletes who can't do it? The professionals, but also us, the non-elites of the world. What do we think whilst watching the best in the world telling us he trains every day and runs 300 kilometers a week and he doesn't feel pain when he runs a marathon? Is it going to push many of us over the edge? I mean, ultimately, these are the conclusions that I'm drawing from this. That maybe, sometimes, an athlete gets to the top because his body can absorb the volume. And those athletes whose bodies can't absorb the volume, they don't get to the top. I know it sounds simple, but maybe that's the caveat that we should start all this with. For me, I see Kelvin Kiptum as a man hell-bent on a journey to try and break 2 hours. And I may be completely wrong on that, but that's how it presents. But for me, training totally different. I'm training to be able to run when I'm 100 years old. And yes, sometimes in my life there'll be higher levels of volume and sometimes lower levels of volume. And the other thing is, I want to know that runners at the top level, when they're running, they feel pain. I want to know that in some way, in some small way, they're mere mortals. Because actually, it's not really fun to hear that someone runs the fastest time that's ever been run and they didn't feel pain. So back to the question at the start of this video. Is Kelvin Kiptum ruining running? First of all, it's not really for me to say. I don't want to say one way or the other whether I believe he's ruining running. What I can tell you is that it is definitely a hard example to hear that high volume and running marathons with no pain might be the way forward. I just fear that it could push so many people over the edge. But also, on the flip side of that, I absolutely respect what Kelvin Kiptum is doing. A man who is willing to push to the absolute limits of his abilities and see what's there, see what he's capable of. And that in itself is super inspiring. And maybe that's what we take away here. That we can't all run 300 kilometer weeks. We can't all run and never have a rest day. But we can all aspire to push to our own limits, the very ends of our abilities. And when we get there, we see, can we push even further past them? And maybe that's where the real inspiration comes in this story. And if you like this video, you're definitely going to like the video of the time where I went and ran with Sean Conway during one of his 105 Ironmen back to back over 105 consecutive days. I know you're going to like it. If you do, consider subscribing to the channel, but no hard sell. And I'll see you next week.